Boston, in the year 1919, was a city in motion. The war in Europe had ended just months before, and the streets buzzed with the energy of returning soldiers, hopeful immigrants, and families eager for a new beginning. The North End, a neighborhood of narrow lanes and brick tenements, was alive with the sounds of children playing, vendors calling out their wares, and the steady clatter of horse-drawn carts. On Commercial Street, near the busy waterfront, stood a giant steel tank 50 feet tall and 90 feet across, looming over the neighborhood like a silent guardian. It belonged to the Purity Distilling Company, and it held more than 2 million gallons of thick, dark molasses. The syrup was destined for rum distilleries and candy factories, a sweet promise of profit in a city that loved its sweets. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. The tank, built in haste during the war, was a patchwork of steel plates and rivets, its seams often leaking sticky trails down the sides. Workers and neighbors grumbled about the constant drips, the sweet smell that hung in the air, and the strange groans and creaks that echoed from the metal walls. But life went on, and the tank remained an unremarkable part of the city's daily rhythm. The morning of January 15th, 1919, dawned bright and unseasonably warm. The sun glinted off the snow that still lingered in the shadows, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of the harbor through the streets. Children hurried to school, their boots crunching on the cobblestones. Horses pulled wagons loaded with barrels and crates. In the firehouse next to the tank, Captain Tony Bentivoglio and his men polished their engines, ready for whatever the day might bring. At the Purity Distilling Company office, workers went about their business, unaware that disaster was only moments away. Inside the tank, the molasses was restless. Just days before, a fresh shipment had arrived, warm syrup pumped in on top of the cold winter batch, creating pressure and gas as the two mixed. The steel walls, already strained by years of use, began to tremble. At 12:30, as the city paused for lunch, a deep, thunderous roar shattered the calm. The tank burst open with a sound like cannon fire. Steel plates flew through the air, and a tidal wave of molasses 30 feet high and moving at more than 35 miles per hour rushed into the streets. The wave swept everything before it. Horses and wagons were tossed aside like toys. The firehouse was lifted from its foundation and smashed to pieces. People ran, but the molasses was faster. It swallowed men, women, and children, trapping them in its sticky embrace. Windows shattered, doors buckled, and the air filled with the cries of the trapped and the terrified. In the chaos, acts of heroism shone through. Firefighters, their own station destroyed, waded into the molasses to pull survivors from the muck. Police officers and neighbors formed human chains, risking their lives to save others. Doctors and nurses rushed to the scene, their boots sticking in the syrup as they tended to the injured. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that bring history's greatest mysteries to life. For hours, the city struggled against the flood. The molasses cooled and thickened in the winter air, turning the streets into a sticky, deadly quagmire. Rescuers used planks, ladders, and even boats to reach those trapped in cellars and under debris. The cries of the wounded echoed through the night, mingling with the shouts of rescuers and the distant clang of church bells. By morning, the scale of the disaster was clear. 21 people had lost their lives, and more than 150 were injured. Horses lay dead in the streets, their bodies coated in syrup. Buildings were shattered, and the neighborhood was unrecognizable, a landscape of ruin and sweetness. The cleanup was a monumental task. Hundreds of workers, aided by sailors from the nearby Navy Yard, shoveled and scraped the molasses from the streets. Salt water from the harbor was pumped in to wash away the syrup, but the sticky residue clung to everything. For weeks, the city smelled of molasses. The harbor ran brown, and the taste of sweetness lingered in the air. As the city mourned, questions arose. How could such a disaster happen? Who was to blame? The Purity Distilling Company insisted the tank had been sabotaged by anarchists, but the people of the North End knew better. They remembered the leaks, the groans, the warnings ignored. A lengthy court case followed, with engineers, workers, and neighbors all testifying to the tank's flaws. In the end, the court ruled against the company. The disaster was the result of negligence, a tank built too quickly, maintained too poorly, and filled beyond its limits. The victims and their families received compensation, and new laws were passed to ensure that such a tragedy would never happen again. But the memory of the Great Molasses Flood lingered. For years, the people of Boston spoke of the day the city ran sweet. Children played in the sticky streets, their laughter a reminder that life goes on. The North End rebuilt, its scars slowly fading beneath new buildings and fresh paint. Yet, even today, on hot summer days, old-timers say you can still catch the faint scent of molasses in the air. A sweet, sad reminder of a day when disaster struck and a city came together in courage and compassion. The Great Molasses Flood is more than a story of tragedy. It is a story of resilience, of neighbors helping neighbors, of a city that refused to be defeated by disaster. It is a reminder that history is not just made by great battles and famous names, but by the everyday courage of ordinary people. So, the next time you stir sugar into your tea or taste the sweetness of molasses in a cookie, remember the people of Boston and the day the city was swept away by a wave of syrup. Remember the firefighters, the doctors, the neighbors who risked everything to save others. Remember that even in the darkest moments, there is light and sometimes even a little sweetness. If you enjoyed this journey into one of history's most unexpected disasters, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. There are more stories waiting to be told right here.